As Joe mentioned, I am Kevin Garden. I am the Washington, D.C. representative of the National Forest Recreation Association, also known as NAFRA. We are one of the many proud members of ORR, and we very much appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today. By way of background, NAFRA's members are outdoor recreation service providers who operate primarily, but not exclusively, on and in our national forests nationwide. The types of services that they provide include campground operations, lodges and resorts, pack stations, summer camps, marinas, and also outfitter and guide operations as well, typically associated with those facilities. Today, we are going to have a couple members of NAFRA whose facilities are literally embedded in our national forests, which puts them in a somewhat unique position. We're going to have them address the issue of the increased interest and level of participation of the public in outdoor recreation and the impacts that's having on the existing infrastructure on our federal lands. Now, again, by way of background, NAFRA's members operate both government-owned facilities, such as campgrounds, which are wholly dependent on the existing government-owned infrastructure, and Warren will speak to that. They also operate privately built and owned facilities, such as resorts, marinas, and pack stations, and Ryan's going to speak to that. And those facilities, while they are privately built and maintained, still depend very much on the surrounding federal infrastructure as well, for both access to and operation of the facilities, as well as access to the natural resources around them, such as trailheads and boat ramps. Now, NAFRA's members are uniquely situated in a way that gives them the ability to see up close and personal the status of the federal infrastructure and how it's serving the public. They live this 24/7 during the season. And this includes, anywhere from the roads and bridges that visitors have to use to get to their sites, the power infrastructure that's needed for their operations, the various types of structures that are needed specifically for them, such as, importantly, restrooms, and pretty much everything else that's part and parcel of the required infrastructure, including parking lots, which are always important. They're also very closely involved in the maintenance of these facilities, particularly, as Warren's going to talk about, those folks who are operating federally owned campground facilities, because a large part of their job and their responsibility under their permit includes maintaining and repairing those particular facilities. Now, as we all know, outdoor recreationists and their expectations are changing. We've been talking about that. We're very much aware of it. But most of the infrastructure on federal lands was largely designed decades ago. And for that reason, at times, it simply does not meet the expectations and demands of the new visitors. And with the goal of attracting as many individuals as we can from more diverse parts of our society, folks who have not historically recreated on federal lands, that need to redesign the infrastructure, including looking for opportunities to redesign when completing deferred maintenance, to the extent you can do that, is critical, because the existing recreational facilities historically have not been drawing those parts of society in numbers we like to see. And as they say, the definition of crazy is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So we obviously need to change our approach if we want to change the results. So as I mentioned, our presentation today includes Warren Meyer, who's the president of RRM CLM LLC, which operates campgrounds on about 15 national forests throughout the country, coast to coast. Warren also operates campgrounds on lands managed by the Corps of Engineers, the Tennessee Valley Authority, and on many states. Overall, RRM CLM operates about 520 sites, which gives it a very good understanding of the state of the overall infrastructure. And Warren, I imagine you're pretty busy right now, so we appreciate you spending some time with us today. Also with us is Ryan Cook. Ryan and his wife Stephanie are second generation concessionaires who operate Lake Ocoee Inn and Marina on the Ocoee National Forest in Tennessee under a Forest Service term special use permit. Now, Lake Ocoee, I guess technically known as Parksville Reservoir, is also a Tennessee Valley Authority controlled lake, but the recreation around it is operated by the Forest Service, and Ryan and Stephanie work with the Forest Service under a permit to provide that recreation. Now, pretty much all of the structures that Ryan and Stephanie use, such as the marina and the resort they have out there, are privately built, owned, and maintained by them. But obviously, being embedded within the National Forest, they very much rely upon the federal infrastructure in the forest to be able to operate. Now, they also have a whitewater rafting operation on the Ocoee River as well, which I must note was the whitewater venue for the 1996 Olympics. So I'm sure that's quite an exciting ride for folks. And you can tell they're involved in quite a wide variety of recreational activities, which again, depend not only on the infrastructure of the Ocoee National Forest, but the TVA as well. So they've got a little bit of a mix of experience there. So I wanted to go ahead and start with a discussion of the current state of the infrastructure based on Warren and Ryan's extensive experiences. And with the time limits we have, we obviously cannot do a deep dive into all the issues, but I was hoping both of you, Warren and Ryan, could give us a short overview of what that state is, that state of the current state of the infrastructure from your particular perspective. So Warren, why don't we go ahead and start with you? If you could just give us a brief description of the services your company provides and the federal facilities and infrastructure that you rely upon to provide those services.
Do we want to talk about the condition at this point, or are we going to wait on that one?
Yeah, that's kind of the current state. Yeah, the condition.
Yeah, so I would say that first, as Kevin said, we operate about 520 different public campgrounds and recreation areas. And so we see a lot. It's all we do is we only run public sites for the Forest Service and other authorities. One of the good things about the Forest Service is I think the concession program is structured in such a way that we can use the Granger Thigh funds, the fees we pay, actually can get put back to doing capital maintenance in the campgrounds. And because of that, at least in the ones that are pretty busy and there's pretty good revenues and therefore pretty good fees, we actually keep up with deferred maintenance pretty well. There's a source of budget that can't be swept. It has to be used for maintenance in these locations. We're right there to apply it. And so in a lot of the campgrounds, at least the major facilities a lot of them are in pretty good shape. There's a few exceptions that roads are obviously the biggest problem. I mean, it's very difficult to get anybody, and that's up to Congress, to invest in roads. They're not sexy in campgrounds and such. And so roads continue to be a problem and are starting to actually force the closure of some campgrounds because the roads have gotten so bad. Water systems are terrible, especially in California. They're old and they do not sit up to standards. And so we've been slowly trying to get those with our GT funds. We have a lot of GT funds, over $600,000 a year we pay in the Inyo National Forest, and we're trying to target several water systems for replacement every year using those funds, but it's a long road. And one of the things, oddly, with all the use this year has been the lack of cell phone coverage. We've got a lot of newbies coming into the forest, younger people finally that are coming in after years and years of just attracting a lot of seniors, and they depend on their phone for navigation, for interpretive information, for emergencies. And so, to the extent the Forest Service can work with providers to get better cell phone coverage in the forest and help enable that, through their various programs, land use programs, and letting these towers get built is one of the biggest things I think that could be done. And the final thing I would say is what Kevin said is just the nature of the amenities are getting old. In 1970, a Forest Service campground and a private campground looked a lot alike. Now they look completely different. So when we talk about deferred maintenance, that actually understates the underinvestment by the public in its campgrounds. Private campgrounds have invested in all kinds of different options. People want to be in the campgrounds last year, but you can only be in the campgrounds if you were raised in a family that taught you how to pitch a tent, or if you owned an RV. Well, that's very limiting. And there's an equity issue to not having more options like yurts and cabins and other things to live out in the forest. And I think investments in those things that are happening in other public agencies would really benefit the forest. And the final thing I would say is, I think to some extent the traditional tent camper is being crowded out. And I will tell you the number one reason for that is that tent campers, and I am a tent camper, don't like the RV noise. The RVs come in and they run their generator. And so, but you don't have that as much in private campgrounds. Why? Because all the RVs have electricity. I know that the folks have resisted electrifying these Forest Service campgrounds because we want to leave them sort of pristine and natural. I would argue putting electricity in the campgrounds would make them more natural because it would allow all the generators to turn off and you could actually get back to a quiet environment, and you would allow RVs and tent campers to live in harmony again. Anyway, so those are the types of things that we're seeing.
Hey, Warren, real quick, before we turn to Ryan, you mentioned GT, which is the Granger Thigh Fee Offset Program, which is somewhat unique to the Forest Service. I know it's kind of complicated, but can you give us just a 20-second summary of what that's all about?
So if let's say in the INYO, we pay, in certain permits, we pay 20, let's say it's 20% of revenues, and I have $300,000 of customer revenues. That means we owe the Forest Service, $60,000. That $60,000 can either be written as a check to Uncle Sam, it goes off the Treasury, never to be seen again locally, or if used that year, we actually sit down and can plan capital maintenance projects, major maintenance projects with the Forest Service, and together we plan the use of that money, and then we, as become the contractor and deploy that money. We do it at cost because it's just a cost plus system. And so we deploy that money at cost to repair the facilities. And plus, we're right there every day. We know what's broken. We know what needs to be fixed. We got people in the campground who can very cheaply fix these things. So not only is there money available that can't be swept to other purposes for maintenance, but it can be used kind of very cost effectively. The dollar gets stretched a long way to do a lot of things. And it's really been, without that, I think a lot of the campgrounds we run in the Forest Service would really be under a tremendous amount of pressure because basically when things go wrong, the districts, when a pump goes bad, they don't have discretionary money to fix those things, and it might be the campground has to close for months until money can be found somewhere. Well, we don't have to go searching for money. The money's there. We fix the pump, we get going, and the visitor continues to be served.
Great, thanks. Okay. All right, Ryan, let's turn to you real quick. And I understand Stephanie was supposed to be here with us, but she's actually out working in the marina, so she can't join us. So you're on your own this morning. But your operations obviously are different than Warren's. You guys run a marina and a lodge there as well. So based on that, can you tell us about your operations at Lake Ocoee and basically what the infrastructure that you rely upon for your private structures? What's the state of that infrastructure right now?
Thank you, Kevin. So yes, we are in the Cherokee National Forest, the Ocoee Ranger District. We have a 200 slip covered marina. We have a small 9-unit motel, and we have 5 cabins located here on Parksville Lake, as the locals call it, Lake Ocoee. We also have rafting here, as you mentioned, on the Ocoee River, home of the 1996 Olympics. And we go back and forth with our neighbor Pigeon River as the most rafted whitewater river in America. The state of our facilities is a little bit different than Warren because it's up to us. We are on a Griffith system with the Forest Service. So as we make investments on the property here, the investments we make base our fee. So it is also based on income, but as we invest more money in the property, our fee to the Forest Service will go down. So it's incentivizes us to not pocket all the revenue and to invest in our structures and maintain our facilities to a good standard, and that's what we try to do. So our location, I feel like we're in good shape because we don't have to ask permission to fix a pump, or if a water line breaks, we fix it and it's on us. So that makes for a good system for us. Around our area, the access sites, the other public boat ramps on the lake, they are in some disrepair and do need some updating. And as Warren mentioned, a boat ramp in 1970 and what it looked like then is way different than what people envision today. It's not just a place to launch your boat. It's also a place to meet people and pick people up and have a dock for fishing and a place to picnic. It's not just a boat launch anymore. So to envision a modern day boat ramp encompasses a lot more than just a place to back your truck up and your trailer in the water and launch your boat. I will echo what Warren said. Access to cell phone towers and cell phone access where we're at is a huge thing. As we get youth groups and church groups showing up to our facility to stay in our cabins, the first thing the youth leader says is, they have no phone access. We have to let the parents know that the children are here. What can we do? And so what we were able to do is work through with the Forest Service to get a fiber internet ran to our facility about 5 years ago. So from that, we were able to create a Wi-Fi zone, and people can make Wi-Fi calls from our facility now. But the other locations around our forest and around our lake, cell phone coverage is spotty at best. So to have the infrastructure of the fiber to our facility was a huge improvement for us. I will say that it was a very cumbersome process to work through to get the fiber to our facility. It was about 1,000 yards down the road, and it literally took 18 months to get permission to get the fiber ran to us, and our regional forester had to sign off on the process. And this is down a U.S. highway that already had sewer, water, and telephone. And we wanted fiber to run in the same ditch with those other utilities. And 18 months in a regional forester was a very cumbersome process for us to go through to get the fiber. But now we have it. We now have online reservations, and the youth groups and the children can make phone calls and let their parents know that they made it to our facility safely now.
Hey, let me ask you real quick. I know you don't have the same drought issues that folks out west do, but being on a reservoir, and I know this is something that's been particularly an issue with the National Park Service concessions. What about flooding? Is that ever created a problem for you, and how does that affect the infrastructure?
So yes, Kevin, we're very unique, being on a TVA lake surrounded by national forest, and then our rafting operation is overseen by state parks, Tennessee State Parks. So 3 government agencies to work through to provide rafting, and TVA, along with our reservoir, they provide our flood control. So yes, we do have flooding sometimes, and there is a superstructure on our dam that is made to break away in times of flooding. It did break away this past February. So when that happens, when the rain slows down and TVA can control the water, they will drop the lake approximately 8 feet so they can get their barges against the concrete portion of the dam and rebuild the wooden structure that is made to break away in flood conditions. So when that happens, our docks are high and dry as on our cabins, but our marina is still floating. It does provide an opportunity to do some maintenance that we don't always get to do when the water's up. So it's a help and a hurt situation. I would say mostly when the lake drops to 8 feet, it affects the boat ramps run by the Forest Service on the lake. It is hard to launch the boats because the boat ramps don't go as far into the lake as what ours do.
All right, I know we kind of have a limited amount of time here, so let me just jump to the next section here, and we'll get to some of the questions too, hopefully as part of our conversation. But what I want to turn to now is the current public demand. We talked about that earlier, the impacts of COVID. Park Service talked about how their levels overall are down, but I think you guys have experienced dramatically increased levels because of the kind of recreation that you provide. As we all know, the pandemic has very much resulted in the public discovering, or in some cases rediscovering, the benefits of outdoor recreation, which I think we all would agree is great for society, but it puts pressure on the system, and it puts pressure on the resources. So again, can each of you give us, just provide us with a description of what that increased public activity has looked like at your facilities and the issues it's raised? And Warren, I'll go to you first, but I'll also notice Margaret raised a question about dispersed camping, which I know doesn't happen on your facilities, but obviously is related to camping. So maybe you could touch on that as well. And you're mute right now, Warren. You're muted.
I know that's the phrase of the decade now.
I hear more than anybody.
So one difference between us and the National Park Service, not totally but maybe with the top 10 or 15 National Park Service parks, and I don't know how Ryan's business works, but almost all of our visitors, we served 10 million visitors last year just in the facilities, the public facilities we run, and they're almost all from what I call a tank of gas away, which means 2 to 4 hours at the most. And we have some people that are religious campers that come here all the time, and you could almost hit a rock their house with a rock. I mean, they're just from right over there. So we tend to be, when the whole world shuts down, you can't go to Europe, you can't go to the Yellowstone, we tend to be, these tend to be the places that folks want to go. And last year we were just slammed with demand. We were closed for whole months, like California was closed in the Forest Service for all of September, and we were closed a lot in April, May. But when we were open, we were up 25 to 30%. At a state park in California, I remember at Bernie Falls, we had 2-hour-long waits to get into the park. But the thing that really I remember is before we were allowed to open in April and May, we had a problem with people breaking in. We had a lake in near Tucson on Mount Lemmon, where we had, when it was supposed to be closed, and we had 4,000 or 5,000 visitors on Saturday and Sunday each, which finally convinced the Forest Service it would be safer to open it and maybe unlock the bathrooms and empty the trash rather than let 4,000 or 5,000 people kind of be there unattended. But people were breaking gates. They were breaking the law to get recreation. Now, I don't encourage that, but if you want to measure how much people needed recreation, it was the fact that generally law-abiding people are breaking the law to get at public recreation, which is a mixed message, but certainly means that we as public recreation folks have something that folks really need. And so it was simply overwhelming demand. We are really busy. Reservations are up 2 times over what they are last year. And this year is going to be a lot about managing that. And it's not really relevant to this topic, but the hardest problem is we have the same problem everybody else in the country is and on top of that, it's impossible to get employees. So it has been overwhelming. And the developed recreation, dispersed recreation has been a huge issue. And we're lucky that nothing really bad like a fire or something came out of that, or maybe it did in California. I didn't look at all the causes of fires, but you had the combination last year is everybody wants to get out and recreate. And a lot of the Forest Service and law enforcement are all in their houses and the office were closed. Well, the lack of enforcement plus this incredible demand pushed a lot of people into camping without a lot of scrutiny and oversight. And fortunately, it's not really our job most of the time to clean up the mess, but we interact with forest people, and it was a real mess in a lot of places. And so yeah, it convinced me the developed recreation program, I think, makes a ton of sense. I think last year it really proved its mettle, because here's a time, if any time that people A, needed public recreation, and B, you need to have some kind of clear oversight, you need to have special cleaning regimens, you needed to have special equipment, all these kinds of things needed to happen. And I think we were able to do that in the public recreation, the developed recreation world. I really think it proved its mettle last year. And it will even more on fires. You see all these fires and things. That's the whole point of developed recreation, is we try to push the risks and push the environmental impact into these developed areas where we can monitor them and hopefully get fewer of those fires and bad incidents. So it's going to be, all of my guys are sort of just kind of, we're excited about having a good year financially, but everybody's a little nervous because it's going to be a really crazy year.
Hey, Ryan, let's turn back to you. And I initially want to apologize for referring to as the Ocoee National Forest. I hunt and fish on the Cherokee, so I should know better than that, so I apologize. But you obviously have a very different situation. You run a marina and an inn, no campgrounds. So what have you seen as far as the increase in public input, which I think you've seen down there, and the impacts or stresses it's putting on the infrastructure?
Yes, Kevin. Our marina and lodging operation was up. We've never seen an increase as we saw last year of people coming to the area. Rafting was down, and that was just due to people didn't want to come and get on a bus to go rafting on the Ocoee River and ride the bus with other folks. And there's just no way to take one family up at a time. There's just not time enough in the day to take people rafting like that. But our marina filled up last spring, and we were turning people away and had a rather large waiting list. And it's the same this year as well. Nobody is selling boats. They're all keeping their boats. They're all showing up and using their boats, which is great. We're at capacity, and our lodging this year, the reservations are up. We don't have a whole lot of dates open in the summertime for people to book now, which is a great problem to have. my wife and I, Stephanie, we noticed last year as things were opening up in Tennessee, we're in Tennessee, and some of the neighboring states weren't open. As we sat in the parking lot and watched the traffic go by and the people that were coming from other states that weren't necessarily open, the traffic was enormous. We had to hire a parking attendant to limit our parking to slip owners and people visiting our facility only, because simply the people just trying to get here to get outside in places that were open, it was enormous. So our biggest strain has been our parking lot. And you know, we want to service our guests and the people that rent our slips and pay money. And we really would like to introduce more people to the area and show them what we have, but it's hard to keep the parking. Our parking lot is just our biggest issue.
Okay. All right, I'm kind of running out of time here, Jill, so I'm counting on you to keep us on schedule, but let me turn to the last phase, which is the hard question. What can we do to address these issues that you've talked about? And the primary two I'd like you guys to focus on are the funds that are currently being made available and for the next few years under the Great American Outdoors Act. So recognizing that these funds are generally limited to addressing deferred maintenance, not new construction, but there's some room for some variety in that. What recommendations can you offer to best take advantage of the GAOA funds to address these issues, such as using the funds to update existing infrastructure when you're doing deferred maintenance? So Warren, I'll go back to you on that one. You're on mute still, Warren.
My sense is that, and I don't understand, the Forest Service has a ton of these local planning processes. It seems like our recreation officers and line managers are always doing some kind of document like that. But what I don't see, and I don't want to say it doesn't exist, but what I don't see is sort of a more holistic view of, let's look at our capital maintenance and then let's look at our multiple source of funds and let's see, because there may be synergistic uses we can have for them. For example, if you look at the Granger Thigh funds from our permit, in a forest like the Inyo, we pay the Inyo $600,000 or $700,000 of GT every year that can be used for capital maintenance. The forest has never really had a process for strategically thinking about that money and saying, okay, over 10 years, that's $6 million. Now, it may be that rangers have so much money that $6 million is nothing, but I think a lot of the line officers have sort of delegated recreation and they don't even realize that, hey, we had a $6 or $7 million flow of funds for maintenance coming out of these permits over 10 years. Maybe that should be part of our planning process. So the first thing is we tell all our line officers, look, I don't think we're using the GT offset, which is the name for the fees we pay, the GT fees, strategically. And I think melding, and if we're going to have a process now with these new funds, which is great from this new act, I think that gives, if the process is already going to exist, so where's the best way to spend that? Then I think the other sources of funds that maybe have been underutilized in the past, like the Granger Thigh offset funds, should be part of that discussion process, because every forest isn't lucky enough to have that much flowing from their concessionaires, but some are. I mean, and I think it's a huge opportunity that's being missed. The only other thing I would say, and this is really lets the hand off to Ryan, is our company last year spent $4 or $5 million making capital improvements and adding new amenities like cabins and yurts and even just fixing things on public recreation lands for every agency we work with except the Forest Service. The TVA last year, we spent $2 or $3 or $4 million. The Lower Colorado River Authority in Texas, we spent $1 million. We spent millions of dollars making investments in improving facilities and updating facilities and fixing facilities on public lands. And we would love to do that in the Forest Service, who we consider our mother agency. And we just can't, because I know the Forest Service is thinking about this, but just as an additional spur, I mean, there is a lot of public investment that could come if they can broaden some things like the program under which Ryan is, or lengthen GT fee time, the GT contract times, permit times. There's a lot of potential private capital, and that really, I have this transition of Ryan, because he's really been able to do that in the Forest Service where we really have not.
Yeah, Ryan, so we'll go ahead and turn to you about that. Is why I also kind of want you to talk about, you know, you raised the issue of the parking lots being a problem there. And I see a question from Ann in the chat session about carrying capacity. If you could speak to, if you guys are maxed out, I know one of the issues of carrying capacity is that everyone wants to go to the popular areas. And there are a lot of other areas out there that provide the same kind of recreational opportunity, but there's just not the access, or they're just not known enough to the public. So maybe you could speak to that as well, given that you're obviously, I'm sure, a destination point for a lot of people, but as they come in, I'm sure there's a lot of other opportunities they could see on their way into your place.
Sure. Yes. So number one, speaking to what Warren said, our investment here on our property is we're getting close to reaching $4 million here on one site. So that helps us as far as our fees go, but yet we're not able to serve all of the public. There's 3 Forest Service boat ramps on this lake that we're on, Parksville Lake. And from my understanding, this past weekend, they were full, and to the point where people with the Forest Service were out turning away, customers because there was just no parking. So I just think we need to, like Warren said, look at what the 2021 to 2030 boat ramp looks like. What does the 2021 to 2030 campground look like? And then use private money to help the Forest Service augment what it takes to build these places, and let us help run these places to better serve the public. I see, as we heard in the opening remarks, the diversity of the people coming out to use boats and camping and to the forest. It's from the eyeball, the thousand eye eyeball, the diversity of the people showing up to our facility is a lot different than what it was 10 years ago.
Great. Jill, how are we doing on time?
I was just putting it in the chat. So I was talking to Ben, and some of the other folks are starting to wrap up and kind of move into the solution session. So folks just need to make sure that they go back to the agenda and click that stream. But I'd say we've probably got another minute and we should probably wrap up.
Okay, let me put it out for questions from the group, but I also want to, if anyone's out there from another federal agency, I'm not aware of that Granger Thigh Authority Warren talked about being available to other agencies. But I do know I've seen situations where they very much have looked at it and wish they could have it. So if there's anyone out there that could speak to that as well, please do. But with the little bit of time we have left, we'll go ahead and take questions from the group if there are any. Okay, unless someone's on mute, we have no questions. So I guess we'll go ahead and wrap up so we can kind of work on our action items. I think I have a list here, and Jill, we can talk about them as well. But if there's nothing else, Ryan, Warren, thank you very, very much for taking time out of, I know what is a busy, busy weekend and beginning week of the summer for you all. And NAFRA wants to thank ORR for the opportunity to be able to address this issue.